Have you ever felt the crushing weight of unfinished tasks piling up, each day growing heavier, each deadline slipping further out of reach? Every ambitious person has been there, trapped by procrastination, spinning their wheels, feeling their goals slip away one distraction at a time. You start with high intentions, but somehow your energy fades, your clarity blurs, and your progress stalls. But here's the brutal truth. Procrastination isn't just stealing your time, it's robbing you of your dreams. It's silently destroying your potential, piece by painful piece. Right now, you're standing at a crossroads. One path leads to a future of regret, lost opportunities, and the haunting what-ifs of unrealized ambitions. The other path, clear, disciplined, and systematic, leads directly to the kind of mastery and achievement that most people only dream of. This book, First Principles Discipline, Destroy Procrastination Forever, is your precise roadmap to that second path. Inside, you'll discover not vague motivational cliches, but scientifically backed, rigorously tested systems for obliterating procrastination at its source. By breaking any daunting task into crystal clear steps, you'll transform overwhelm into effortless execution. Imagine slicing through complex projects with laser-like clarity, systematically dismantling every barrier between you and unstoppable momentum. You don't need superhuman willpower. You don't need perfect conditions. All you need is a proven method, and that's exactly what this book delivers. You'll finally understand why previous productivity attempts failed, and precisely how first principles thinking rewires your brain for clarity, consistency, and explosive progress. The choice is clear. You can either let procrastination continue to quietly sabotage your potential, or you can seize control right now, armed with the unshakable discipline to accomplish anything you set your mind to. Turn the page, dive into the strategies, and reclaim your power over procrastination forever. Chapter 1, First Principles. Your heart pounds at 3 a.m. as another deadline looms, and that project you started 3 months ago sits there, still unfinished, still haunting you like a broken promise. You know exactly what needs to be done, yet somehow every time you sit down to tackle it, the task feels like a mountain too steep to climb. The overwhelm crashes over you in waves, and you find yourself scrolling through your phone instead of making progress. This chapter will teach you to dismantle any intimidating project into its fundamental building blocks so that overwhelm becomes impossible. You'll learn to spot the exact micro moment where your motivation typically collapses and construct a clear path forward that your brain can't resist following. Most people attack complex goals like amateur boxers, throwing wild haymakers at shadows, exhausting themselves on motion without progress. They confuse activity with achievement, busyness with effectiveness. The result? Endless spinning, chronic stress, and the gnawing feeling that everyone else has figured out some secret they're missing. But here's what separates the top 1% from everyone else. They don't work harder on their goals. They work smarter on their thinking. They've mastered the art of reductionist decomposition, breaking down any challenge until it becomes a series of simple, executable steps. When you see the core of what needs to be done, excuses evaporate like morning mist. Consider this. Expert engineers solve complex design problems using 35% fewer substeps than novices and finish 25% faster. The difference isn't intelligence or experience alone, it's their systematic approach to decomposition. They've trained themselves to ask the right questions in the right sequence until the path forward becomes crystal clear. The human brain is wired to avoid ambiguity. When faced with a vague, overwhelming task, your nervous system triggers fight or flight responses. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for executive decision-making, literally shuts down under cognitive overload. This is why you can feel paralyzed when staring at a massive project, even when you know exactly what the end result should look like. But when you break that same project down to its irreducible elements, something magical happens. Your brain shifts from threat detection mode to problem-solving mode. The amygdala calms down. Your prefrontal cortex comes back online. Suddenly, what felt impossible becomes inevitable. This isn't just productivity theory, it's cognitive science in action. The first time you apply these principles, you'll be able to reduce any goal to its atomic components within 10 minutes. You'll spot the single micro step where you usually stall and construct a next physical action that can be completed in under 2 minutes. No more staring at your to-do list wondering where to begin. No more analysis paralysis. No more excuses. Over time, as you continue practicing first principles thinking, the compound effects become extraordinary. Projects that used to take months will launch weeks earlier. Your deadlines will shrink by 25% because you'll eliminate all the unnecessary complexity that slows most people down. Decision clarity will compound into a reputation for lightning-fast execution, the kind of reputation that opens doors and accelerates careers. Most importantly, chronic overwhelm will disappear entirely, replaced by controlled surge and recover cycles. You'll know exactly when to push hard and when to pull back. You'll work with the rhythm of your energy, not against it. The process involves 3 critical steps, and they must be executed in this exact sequence. First comes the question burst. Set a timer for 90 seconds and write down every unknown about the task. Don't filter, don't organize, don't judge, just dump every question, concern, and uncertainty onto paper. What resources do you need? What skills are required? What could go wrong? Who needs to be involved? What's the real deadline? What does success actually look like? This brain dump serves a crucial psychological function. Hidden ambiguity is the silent killer of motivation. Your subconscious mind knows when you're trying to tackle something you don't fully understand, and it will sabotage your efforts to protect you from potential failure. By making the unknowns visible, you transform vague anxiety into specific problems that can be solved. Next comes the slice-down drill. Take your main objective and repeatedly ask, can this be halved? Keep slicing until you reach something irreducible, a task so small and specific that your brain has no choice but to see it as achievable. Most people make the fatal error of trying to optimize before they simplify. They add complexity when they should be subtracting it. They create elaborate systems when they need elegant simplicity. The slice-down drill prevents this premature optimization by forcing you to find the essence of what actually needs to happen. Finally comes constraint tagging. Mark every bottleneck in red: time constraints, skill gaps, resource limitations. This isn't about solving the constraints yet. It's about making them visible so you can attack them strategically rather than stumbling into them blindly. Why this sequence? Because each step builds on the previous one. Bursting questions first purges the hidden ambiguity that creates resistance. Slicing next prevents you from wasting energy on unnecessary complexity. Tagging last transforms fuzzy obstacles into visible, solvable constraints. Think of it like diffusing a bomb. You don't start cutting wires randomly. You first understand the device, then identify the critical components, then neutralize the threats in order of priority. First principles thinking follows the same logic. Here's what this looks like in practice. Let's say you want to launch a side business. Instead of drowning in the enormity of starting a company, you question burst for 90 seconds. What product will I sell? Who's my target customer? How will I reach them? What's my minimum viable product? What legal structure do I need? How much capital is required? Then you slice down. Launch a business becomes validate product idea, becomes interview 10 potential customers, becomes send 1 email to 1 person asking for 15 minutes of their time. Suddenly, you have a concrete action you can take in the next 2 minutes. Finally, you constraint tag time, only evenings and weekends. Skills, need to learn basic marketing. Resources, limited budget for testing. Now you know exactly what you're working with and what you need to acquire. The beauty of this system is that it works regardless of the domain. Whether you're planning a career transition, writing a book, organizing a wedding, or building a product, the fundamental process remains the same. Strip away the complexity until you reach the core. Make the invisible visible. Transform overwhelming into inevitable. Most people live their entire careers reacting to complexity instead of reducing it. They accept overwhelm as the price of ambition. They mistake confusion for sophistication and busyness for progress. but you now have a different path, one that leads to clarity, momentum, and results. The world rewards those who can see through complexity to find simplicity on the other side. Every great achievement in history started with someone asking, "What is this really?" and refusing to accept the first answer. They kept digging until they found bedrock, then built from there. Your next project doesn't have to feel overwhelming. Your next goal doesn't have to trigger anxiety. Your next deadline doesn't have to create chaos. You have the tools to break it all down, see it clearly, and move forward with confidence. But first principles thinking is just the foundation. Once you've learned to see clearly, you need to identify what's actually slowing you down. In the next chapter, we'll explore how a single hidden bottleneck might be strangling 80% of your potential progress, and how to find it before it finds you. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Grow to the Top and activate notifications to receive more self-improvement tips that will supercharge your growth. And make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. It really helps the channel grow. Thank you for your support. Chapter 2, Constraint Map. You've mastered the art of breaking down complex projects into manageable pieces, yet somehow you're still moving at a crawl. Every day feels like you're running through quicksand. Lots of motion, minimal progress. You check off tasks, attend meetings, send emails, but at the end of the week, you look back and wonder where all that effort actually went. Here's the brutal truth. You're probably working incredibly hard on things that don't matter, while ignoring the one thing that's secretly choking your entire operation. This chapter will teach you to identify the single bottleneck that's strangling 80% of your potential progress and show you exactly how to eliminate it. You'll learn to see delay not as lost time, but as lost opportunity, and that shift in perspective will transform how you approach every project for the rest of your career. Most ambitious professionals make the same devastating mistake. They see a dozen problems and attack them all simultaneously. They optimize everything except the one thing that actually matters. They're like a driver trying to improve their car's performance by polishing the hubcaps while ignoring the fact that the engine is misfiring. The result? Endless frustration, heroic effort with mediocre results, the gnawing suspicion that everyone else has figured out some secret formula for getting things done faster. But what if I told you that in most systems, whether it's your personal workflow, your team's processes, or your company's operations, there's typically one constraint that's responsible for the majority of delays. One bottleneck that, if removed, would unlock exponential improvements across everything else. This isn't wishful thinking, it's mathematics. A McKinsey field study tracking 75 production teams over 5 years revealed something extraordinary. Teams that identified and removed their primary constraint boosted overall throughput by 40% on average. Meanwhile, teams that scattered their improvement efforts across multiple areas saw gains of just 5%. The difference between focused constraint removal and scattered optimization is the difference between breakthrough results and incremental tinkering. The concept comes from Eliyahu Goldratt's theory of constraints, originally developed for manufacturing, but devastatingly effective when applied to knowledge work. The core insight is deceptively simple. Any system is only as strong as its weakest link. But here's what most people miss. Strengthening anything other than the weakest link is pure waste. Think about water flowing through a series of pipes. If one pipe has half the diameter of the others, it doesn't matter how much you expand the other pipes. The narrow one will always determine the maximum flow rate. You could double the size of every other pipe in the system, and the total output wouldn't budge by a single drop. Your work operates on the same principle. Somewhere in your process, there's a constraint that's quietly throttling everything else. It might be a skill gap, a resource limitation, an approval bottleneck, or a decision delay. But until you find it and fix it, all your other improvements are just expensive theater. The first step is learning to see your work as a system rather than a collection of random tasks. Most people think in terms of individual activities: write the report, schedule the meeting, send the proposal, follow up with the client. But systems thinkers see the connections, the dependencies, the flow. Start by mapping your process in 5 simple boxes. Take any recurring workflow. Maybe it's how you handle new client projects, or how you develop and launch new initiatives, or how you move from idea to execution on anything important. Draw 5 boxes representing the major stages, then connect them with arrows showing the flow. Don't overthink this. You're not creating a detailed process diagram for ISO certification. You're creating a simple visual representation that helps you see where work gets stuck. The whole exercise should take less than 3 minutes. Now comes the crucial part, identifying where the flow breaks down. Look for 3 specific patterns. First, wait times, stages where work sits idle waiting for someone else to act. Second, rework loops, places where work bounces back and forth, getting revised and re-revised. Third, approval lags, decision points where everything grinds to a halt while waiting for someone to say yes or no. These are your constraint candidates. One of them is almost certainly the primary bottleneck that's limiting your entire system's performance. But here's where most people go wrong. They identify multiple constraints and try to fix them all at once. This is optimization theater. It feels productive, but delivers minimal results. The theory of constraints is ruthlessly focused. Find the one constraint that's limiting the entire system, then exploit it, elevate it, and repeat. Exploiting the constraint means getting maximum performance out of it before you invest in expanding it. If your bottleneck is a weekly approval meeting, can you batch more decisions into each meeting? Can you prepare more thoroughly so fewer items need to bounce back for clarification? Can you delegate some approval authority to reduce the load? Only after you've maximized the constraint's current capacity should you consider elevating it, actually expanding its capacity through additional resources, automation, or process redesign. This might mean hiring additional people, implementing new technology, or restructuring the workflow entirely. The key insight is that every minute the constraint is idle represents lost throughput for the entire system. If your bottleneck can handle 10 units per hour, but it's only working at 70% capacity, you're not just losing 3 units per hour at that stage, you're losing 3 units per hour for the entire system. This is where opportunity cost framing becomes powerful. Most people think about delays in terms of lost time, but time isn't the real cost. It's the lost value that could have been created during that time. Every day your constraint operates below capacity is a day of lost revenue, lost learning, lost momentum, lost competitive advantage. When you start seeing delays as lost upside rather than just lost time, your urgency around constraint removal skyrockets. Suddenly, that approval bottleneck isn't just an annoying delay, it's money walking out the door every single day. The process of constraint identification requires brutal honesty about what's actually happening versus what you think is happening. Your gut instinct about where the bottleneck lies is probably wrong. Humans are notoriously bad at identifying system constraints because we tend to focus on the most visible or annoying problems rather than the ones that actually limit throughput. This is why you need data, not intuition. Track cycle times for each stage of your process. Measure how long work sits in each queue. Count how many items bounce back for rework. The numbers will tell you a story that your gut never could. Once you've identified your primary constraint, the improvement process becomes surprisingly straightforward. You have 2 basic options: load leveling or parallelizing. Load leveling means smoothing out the workflow to the constraint so it operates at consistent capacity. Parallelizing means creating multiple paths through the constraint so more work can flow simultaneously. The choice between these approaches depends on the nature of your constraint. If it's a person who needs to review everything personally, parallelizing might mean training additional reviewers or delegating some decisions. If it's a process that requires sequential steps, load leveling might mean batching work to reduce setup time between tasks. But here's the crucial point. You don't optimize anything else until you've maximized the constraint. It doesn't matter if other parts of your system could theoretically run faster. The constraint sets the pace for everything, so that's where all your improvement energy should focus. This runs counter to most people's instincts. We want to fix everything we see that's broken. We want to make every part of the system as efficient as possible. But this scattered approach is precisely why most improvement efforts fail. You end up with a beautifully optimized system that still crawls along at the same pace because you never addressed the real bottleneck. The constraint removal process is iterative. Once you eliminate one bottleneck, a new one will emerge somewhere else in the system. This isn't failure, it's progress. Each constraint you remove pushes the system to a higher level of performance until you reach the next limiting factor. This is why you need to schedule regular constraint reviews. Set a calendar reminder for every 14 days to reassess your system and identify the new primary constraint. The constraint that was throttling you last month might be completely resolved, but there's always another one waiting to take its place. The improvement cycle continues until marginal gains fall below 5%. At that point, you've probably optimized the system as much as possible without fundamental restructuring. But most people never reach this point because they never focus long enough on any single constraint to eliminate it completely. When you master constraint mapping, the results compound rapidly. Good outcomes include cycle time dropping by 10%. Projects that used to take 10 weeks now finish in 9. Excellent outcomes include on-time delivery jumping by 25%. You become known as someone who hits deadlines consistently. Best-case outcomes include profit per hour rising by 40%. You generate significantly more value in the same amount of time. But the real transformation goes beyond metrics. You develop a systems mindset that sees through complexity to identify leverage points. You stop wasting energy on activities that feel productive but don't move the needle. You become ruthlessly focused on the few things that actually matter. The most common mistake in constraint identification is confusing symptoms with root causes. You might think the constraint is that people don't respond to emails quickly enough, when the real constraint is that you're sending emails that don't clearly specify what action is needed by when. You might think the constraint is that meetings run too long, when the real constraint is that decisions aren't being made and communicated effectively. Always ask the diagnostic question, if I fix this, will overall throughput actually rise? If the answer is no, you're probably looking at a symptom rather than the true constraint. The constraint mapping process works at every level: personal productivity, team effectiveness, organizational performance. The principles remain the same, whether you're optimizing how you handle your daily tasks or how your company develops new products. Find the bottleneck, exploit it, elevate it, repeat. Most people spend their entire careers optimizing the wrong things. They make themselves incredibly efficient at activities that don't matter while ignoring the one constraint that's limiting their entire operation. But you now have a different approach, one that focuses your energy where it can create maximum impact. Your next project doesn't have to crawl along at the same frustrating pace. Your next deadline doesn't have to feel impossible. You have the tools to identify what's really slowing you down and eliminate it systematically. But removing constraints is only half the battle. Even the most perfectly optimized system can fail if you're optimizing for the wrong outcomes. In the next chapter, we'll explore a counterintuitive approach that starts by defining failure before success, and why this backwards thinking might be the key to everything you've been trying to achieve. Chapter 3. Inversion Lens. You've identified your bottlenecks and streamlined your processes, yet something still feels off. Despite all your optimization efforts, you find yourself making the same mistakes repeatedly, walking into the same traps, hitting the same walls. It's as if there's an invisible force working against you, sabotaging your best-laid plans before they can gain momentum. What if the problem isn't that you don't know how to succeed, but that you haven't clearly defined what failure looks like? This chapter will teach you to flip your planning process upside down, starting with disaster and working backwards to prevention. You'll learn to transform vague threats into specific action items and discover why defining what you absolutely must avoid is often more powerful than defining what you want to achieve. Most people approach goal setting like architects designing a beautiful building. They sketch the vision, plan the features, imagine the finished product in all its glory. But they rarely ask the crucial question, what could bring this entire structure crashing down? Meanwhile, the most successful people in any field think like engineers stress testing a bridge. Before they celebrate the design, they ask, where will this break? What loads can it not handle? How could this fail catastrophically? Only after they've identified and reinforced every potential failure point do they proceed with confidence. This backwards approach isn't pessimism, it's precision, and the results speak for themselves. Decision science researchers at Stanford discovered something remarkable when they compared traditional forward planning with what they called inversion-driven planning. Teams that started by defining failure scenarios cut their planning errors by 30%, compared to teams that focused solely on positive outcomes. The inversion teams didn't just perform better, they performed more consistently, with fewer surprises and fewer last-minute crises. The reason is rooted in how your brain processes threats versus opportunities. Your neural circuitry is exquisitely designed to detect and avoid danger, but relatively poor at optimizing for positive outcomes. When you force yourself to imagine failure scenarios, you activate ancient survival mechanisms that have been keeping humans alive for millennia. Your brain becomes hypervigilant, scanning for risks that your optimistic planning mind would completely miss. This is the power of the inversion lens, a mental model that flips your default thinking pattern to reveal hidden vulnerabilities before they can destroy your progress. The process begins with a simple but profound question. How could I guarantee that this project fails spectacularly? Not what might go wrong, but how could I actively sabotage this if I wanted to? The distinction is crucial. The first question invites vague worries. The second demands specific behaviors. When you ask how you could guarantee failure, your brain immediately starts generating a list of concrete actions. Procrastinate on the most important tasks. Avoid difficult conversations. Make decisions based on incomplete information. Skip the research phase. Ignore feedback from key stakeholders. Overcommit to too many things simultaneously. The list writes itself. Each item on this failure list represents a behavior pattern that you must vigilantly avoid. But more importantly, each item can be inverted into a positive command that guides your actions. If procrastinate on important tasks guarantees failure, then tackle the most critical work first becomes a non-negotiable rule. If avoid difficult conversations leads to disaster, then address conflicts early and directly becomes a cornerstone of your approach. This inversion process transforms abstract threats into concrete marching orders. Instead of worrying vaguely about things going wrong, you have a specific list of behaviors to monitor and prevent. Your anxiety shifts from diffuse dread to focused vigilance. The beauty of anti-goals is that they're often easier to define than positive goals. Ask someone what they want from their career, and they might struggle to articulate a clear vision. But ask them what would constitute career disaster, and they can immediately rattle off a dozen scenarios. Getting stuck in a dead-end role, burning bridges with key relationships, developing a reputation for unreliability, missing major industry shifts, becoming obsolete in their field. Each of these anti-goals points towards specific preventive actions. Don't want to get stuck in a dead-end role? Continuously develop skills that transfer across industries. Don't want to burn bridges? Invest time in maintaining relationships even when you don't need anything. Don't want a reputation for unreliability? Build systems that ensure you consistently deliver on commitments. Fear clarity is often more motivating than goal clarity. The prospect of losing what you have activates loss aversion, one of the most powerful psychological drivers. When you vividly imagine the specific ways your project could fail, you create an emotional urgency that pure positive thinking can't match. But inversion thinking goes beyond simple risk management. It's a systematic approach to stress testing your plans before reality does it for you. The process involves running what you might call a 24-hour disaster rehearsal in your mind, imagining that everything that could go wrong does go wrong, all at once, in the worst possible sequence. This mental exercise isn't about becoming paranoid, it's about building anti-fragility into your approach. When you've already imagined the worst-case scenarios and developed responses to them, you become remarkably difficult to derail. Setbacks that would devastate unprepared people become minor course corrections for you. The disaster rehearsal works by forcing you to think through second-order and third-order consequences. Most planning focuses on first-order effects. If I do X, Y will happen. But reality is messier. If you do X and Y happens, what else might be triggered? What dependencies might break? What assumptions might prove false? What resources might become unavailable? Traditional planning assumes everything will go according to schedule. Inversion planning assumes everything will go wrong and prepares accordingly. The result is plans that are robust rather than fragile, adaptive rather than rigid. Consider the difference between these two approaches to launching a new initiative. Traditional planning focuses on the success path. Define the vision, allocate resources, execute the plan, measure results. Inversion planning starts with failure modes. What if key team members quit? What if the budget gets cut? What if the market shifts? What if competitors launch something similar first? What if the technology doesn't work as expected? Each failure scenario generates specific contingency plans. If key team members might quit, you cross-train multiple people on critical skills. If the budget might get cut, you design the project in phases that can be paused or scaled back. If competitors might beat you to market, you focus on differentiation rather than just speed. The inversion process reveals that most failures aren't caused by unforeseeable external events. They're caused by predictable internal behaviors. Projects fail because people avoid making hard decisions. Teams fail because communication breaks down. Strategies fail because assumptions go untested. Careers fail because people stop learning and adapting. These patterns are remarkably consistent across domains. The specific details change, but the underlying failure modes remain the same. This is why inversion thinking is so powerful. Once you learn to recognize these patterns, you can prevent them regardless of the context. The key is to limit your anti-goal list to 5 items maximum. More than that, and you risk falling into what researchers call doom loop pessimism, becoming so focused on potential problems that you become paralyzed rather than prepared. The goal isn't to imagine every possible failure, but to identify the most likely and most damaging ones. For each anti-goal, you then craft a specific preventive command. These aren't vague aspirations like communicate better, but concrete behaviors like send a weekly status update to all stakeholders every Friday by 5 p.m. The more specific the command, the more likely you are to follow it when pressure mounts. The inversion lens also helps with prioritization in a way that traditional goal setting cannot. When you're clear about what you absolutely must avoid, it becomes much easier to decide how to spend your time and energy. Activities that increase the risk of failure get eliminated or minimized. Activities that reduce failure risk get prioritized, even if they're not the most exciting or glamorous. This creates what you might call a no-regrets roadmap, a plan that you'll be satisfied with regardless of the specific outcomes. Even if you don't achieve everything you hoped for, you'll know that you avoided the major pitfalls that could have made the situation much worse. The inversion process needs to be refreshed regularly because failure modes evolve as circumstances change. What could derail your project today might be completely different from what could derail it 6 months from now. Schedule a monthly inversion refresh where you revisit your anti-goals and update your preventive commands based on new information and changing conditions. One of the most powerful applications of inversion thinking is in decision-making under uncertainty. When you're facing a choice between multiple options and the future is unclear, ask yourself, which option has the highest probability of catastrophic failure? Which option would you regret most if everything went wrong? Often, This analysis is more revealing than trying to predict which option will produce the best outcomes. The inversion lens transforms you from someone who hopes things will work out to someone who ensures they will work out. Instead of crossing your fingers and pushing forward, you systematically identify and eliminate the most likely sources of failure. Instead of being surprised by setbacks, you're prepared for them. This shift in mindset has profound effects beyond just project success. You develop what psychologists call defensive pessimism, the ability to imagine negative outcomes without being paralyzed by them. You become more resilient because you've already mentally rehearsed how to handle adversity. You become more confident because you know you've prepared for the worst-case scenarios. The most successful people in any field aren't necessarily the most optimistic. They're the most prepared. They've thought through what could go wrong and built systems to prevent it. They've identified their potential blind spots and created mechanisms to compensate for them. They've imagined failure so vividly that they know exactly how to avoid it. Your next project doesn't have to be derailed by predictable problems. Your next goal doesn't have to fall victim to the same mistakes that have tripped you up before. You now have a systematic approach to identifying and preventing failure before it can take root. But even the most carefully planned project can stall if you can't get started. Knowing what to avoid is crucial, but it's not enough if you're still struggling with the fundamental challenge of taking action. In the next chapter, we'll explore a deceptively simple technique that can shatter the most stubborn resistance and get you moving when everything else has failed. Tiny starts. You stare at your laptop screen, cursor blinking mockingly in an empty document. The project is perfectly planned, the constraints identified, the failure modes mapped out. You know exactly what needs to be done and exactly how to avoid the pitfalls. Yet somehow, you still can't bring yourself to begin. The resistance feels almost physical, like trying to push through an invisible wall that gets stronger the harder you press against it. Your brain generates 1,000 reasons to delay. You need more research, better conditions, the perfect moment, complete clarity. But deep down, you know these are just elaborate excuses masquerading as rational thought. What if the secret to overcoming this paralysis isn't about finding more motivation or building more willpower, but about making the first step so ridiculously small that your brain can't find a reason to resist it? This chapter will teach you to design microscopic entry points that bypass your mental resistance entirely. You'll discover why starting is 80% of beating procrastination and learn to harness the hidden physics of momentum to carry you far beyond what motivation alone could achieve. The human brain is fundamentally lazy. This isn't a character flaw, it's an evolutionary feature. Your neural circuitry is designed to conserve energy whenever possible, which means it will always choose the path of least resistance. When faced with a large, complex task, your brain calculates the energy cost and often decides it's safer to avoid the work entirely than risk failure or exhaustion. This is where most productivity advice goes wrong. It assumes the problem is motivation when the real problem is activation energy, the initial burst of effort required to get started. Just like a rocket needs enormous thrust to escape Earth's gravity, but can coast through space once it reaches orbit, your projects need a massive push to overcome inertia, but can sustain themselves once momentum builds. The solution isn't to generate more thrust, it's to lower the escape velocity. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania discovered something remarkable when they studied student behavior over 8 weeks. Students who reduced their start costs to under 2 minutes logged twice as many weekly study hours compared to those who maintained traditional study sessions. The difference wasn't in their motivation levels or time management skills, it was in their ability to begin. The students who succeeded had learned to identify what researchers call gateway moves, tiny actions that serve as entry points into larger activities. Instead of committing to study for 2 hours, they committed to open the textbook to today's chapter. Instead of write the essay, they committed to type the first sentence. Instead of research the topic thoroughly, they committed to read one article. These gateway moves work because they exploit a quirk in human psychology. Once you start something, you're much more likely to continue than if you never start at all. The hardest part of any task isn't the middle or the end, it's the beginning. Once you're in motion, momentum takes over and carries you forward with surprisingly little additional effort. Think of it like starting a manual car on a steep hill. The initial push requires enormous force, but once the car starts rolling, maintaining that motion becomes almost effortless. Your brain operates on the same principle. The neural pathways associated with task initiation require significant activation energy, but once they're firing, they tend to keep firing. This is why just start advice is simultaneously correct and useless. Yes, starting is the key to everything, but telling someone to just start is like telling someone to just lift 1,000 pounds. The instruction is technically accurate, but practically impossible without the right technique. The technique is to make starting so easy that it becomes harder to avoid than to do. The gateway move must be the absolute first physical action required by the task. Not the first logical step or the first important step, but the first physical motion your body needs to make. If you're writing a report, the gateway move isn't outline the structure, it's open the laptop. If you're exercising, it's not do a warm-up, it's put on workout clothes. If you're making sales calls, it's not review the prospect list, it's pick up the phone. This distinction is crucial because your brain evaluates tasks based on their immediate physical requirements, not their ultimate objectives. When you think about writing a report, your brain imagines hours of mental effort and immediately generates resistance. When you think about opening a laptop, your brain recognizes a simple, familiar action that requires minimal energy. The gateway move must also be visible and concrete. Abstract actions like think about the project or get motivated don't work because they don't trigger clear physical responses. Your brain needs specific instructions. Reach for this object, press this button, walk to this location. The more specific the action, the less room there is for hesitation or negotiation. Once you've identified the gateway move, you need to eliminate every possible source of friction between you and that action. If your gateway move is open the laptop, make sure the laptop is charged, closed, and sitting in plain sight. If it's put on workout clothes, lay them out the night before. If it's pick up the phone, have it within arm's reach with the number already dialed. This preparation phase is where most people underestimate the importance of environmental design. They focus on building willpower when they should be building systems. Willpower is a finite resource that depletes throughout the day, but a well-designed environment works 24/7 without requiring any conscious effort. The power of tiny starts becomes even more pronounced when you link them to existing habits or fixed daily triggers. Instead of relying on motivation or memory, you create automatic cues that prompt the gateway move without conscious decision-making. This might mean opening your laptop immediately after your morning coffee, putting on workout clothes as soon as you wake up, or picking up the phone right after lunch. The key is to choose triggers that happen consistently every day and link them directly to your gateway move. The more automatic the trigger, the less mental energy required to initiate the action. Over time, the connection becomes so strong that the trigger naturally leads to the gateway move, which naturally leads to extended work on the task. This is where the compound effects of tiny starts become extraordinary. What begins as a 2-minute action gradually expands into longer sessions as your brain becomes comfortable with the routine. The student who commits to open the textbook often finds themselves reading for 20 minutes. The person who commits to put on workout clothes often ends up exercising. The professional who commits to pick up the phone often makes several calls. But even when the gateway move doesn't extend into a longer session, it still serves a crucial function. It maintains the habit loop and prevents the decay that comes from skipping days. Consistency matters more than intensity when building long-term momentum. It's better to do something tiny every day than something substantial once a week. The psychological benefits extend beyond just task completion. Each successful gateway move builds what psychologists call self-efficacy, your belief in your ability to execute actions necessary to achieve your goals. When you consistently follow through on small commitments, you develop confidence in your ability to follow through on larger ones. The tiny wins compound into a general sense of competence and control. This is why tracking your gateway moves can be surprisingly motivating. You're not tracking hours worked or pages written, you're tracking the most important metric of all. Did you start? A simple checkmark for each day you complete your gateway move creates a visual record of consistency that reinforces the behavior and makes it harder to break the chain. The tracking can be as simple as marking an X on a calendar or as sophisticated as using a habit tracking app. The specific method matters less than the visibility and immediacy of the feedback. You want to see your progress at a glance and feel the satisfaction of maintaining your streak. But tiny starts aren't just about individual tasks. They're about rewiring your relationship with resistance itself. When you consistently practice starting small, you train your brain to see initiation as easy rather than difficult. The neural pathways associated with task avoidance weaken, while the pathways associated with immediate action strengthen. Over time, this creates a fundamental shift in your default response to new challenges. Instead of your first instinct being to delay or avoid, your first instinct becomes to identify the smallest possible starting point and take action immediately. You develop what might be called activation bias, a tendency to begin rather than hesitate. The most common mistake people make with gateway moves is making them too large. They think just 5 minutes is small enough, but 5 minutes can still feel overwhelming when you're struggling with resistance. The gateway move should be so tiny that it feels almost silly not to do it. If you can think of a reason to avoid your gateway move, it's too big. Another common mistake is trying to design gateway moves for multiple projects simultaneously. This dilutes your focus and makes it harder to build strong habit loops. Start with one project, master the gateway move for that project, then gradually add others. The goal is to build a reliable pattern of immediate action, not to optimize multiple workflows at once. The gateway move also needs to be refreshed periodically as your comfort level with the task increases. What felt challenging a month ago might now feel routine, which means you can gradually expand the scope of your starting action. The student who began with open the textbook might evolve to read the first paragraph. The writer who started with open the laptop might evolve to write the first sentence. This evolution is natural and healthy, but it should happen gradually to maintain the low resistance principle. The moment your gateway move starts feeling difficult again, you've expanded too quickly and need to scale back to something that feels effortless. The ultimate goal of tiny starts isn't to stay tiny forever. It's to build momentum that carries you into sustained action. But the momentum can only build if you consistently overcome the initial resistance. Every time you successfully complete a gateway move, you're not just making progress on that specific task, you're strengthening your capacity to begin anything. Your next project doesn't have to sit in limbo while you wait for motivation to strike. Your next goal doesn't have to be delayed by analysis paralysis or perfectionist hesitation. You now have a systematic approach to bypassing resistance and building momentum from the very first moment. But starting consistently is only half the battle. Even the most reliable starter can struggle with follow-through when the initial momentum fades and the work becomes challenging. In the next chapter, we'll explore a technique that eliminates the need for in-the-moment decision-making entirely, turning your best intentions into automatic behaviors that execute themselves. Chapter 5, If-Then Scripts. You've mastered the art of starting, but something still derails you in the middle of execution. The gateway moves work perfectly. You begin with enthusiasm and momentum, but then life intervenes. A colleague interrupts with an urgent request. Your phone buzzes with a notification. A meeting runs long. Suddenly, you're off track again, and by the time you remember what you were supposed to be doing, the day is nearly over. The problem isn't your ability to start, it's your reliance on willpower to keep going. Every moment of every day, your brain is making thousands of micro decisions. Respond to this email or ignore it, check social media or stay focused, take the easy path or push through resistance. Each decision depletes your mental energy, and by afternoon, you're running on fumes. Your best intentions crumble under the weight of decision fatigue. What if you could eliminate most of these decisions entirely by programming your responses in advance? This chapter will teach you to create mental macros that bypass conscious decision-making altogether. You'll learn to wire your best behaviors directly into your nervous system so they execute automatically when triggered, freeing your cognitive bandwidth for the work that actually matters. Most people think willpower is like a muscle that can be strengthened through training, but recent research suggests it's more like a battery that depletes with use. Every time you resist temptation, make a difficult choice, or force yourself to do something you don't want to do, you drain a little more power from your mental reserves. This is why you can start the day with iron discipline, but find yourself making poor choices by evening. It's not a character flaw, it's a predictable biological process. Your prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for self-control, literally runs out of glucose and begins to shut down. The solution isn't to build more willpower, it's to need less of it. This is where implementation intentions come in, a psychological technique so powerful that researchers initially couldn't believe their own results. The concept is deceptively simple. Instead of relying on motivation to drive behavior, you create specific if-then statements that link situational cues to predetermined actions. The format is always the same. If situation X occurs, then I will do Y. But the power lies in the precision. These aren't vague aspirations like, I'll work harder or I'll be more focused. They're specific behavioral instructions that your brain can execute without conscious deliberation. A meta-analysis of 94 studies involving over 8,000 participants found that people who used implementation intentions were 91% more likely to achieve their goals compared to those who relied on motivation alone. 91%. That's not a marginal improvement. It's a fundamental transformation in how behavior change works. The reason implementation intentions are so effective lies in how they interact with your brain's automatic processing systems. When you create an if-then script, you're essentially programming a stimulus response pattern that bypasses the conscious decision-making process entirely. The situational cue triggers the predetermined action without requiring willpower, deliberation, or even awareness. Think of it like creating a macro in a computer program. Instead of manually typing the same sequence of commands every time you need them, you record them once and then execute them with a single keystroke. Implementation intentions work the same way for your behavior. They automate your best responses so you don't have to consciously choose them in the moment. But here's what most people miss. The power of implementation intentions isn't just in the automation, it's in the pre-decision. When you create an if-then script, you're making the choice when your willpower is strong and your judgment is clear, not when you're tired, stressed, or distracted. You're essentially having a conversation with your future self and giving them explicit instructions for how to handle challenging situations. This pre-decision element is crucial because it eliminates what psychologists call the moment of choice, that split second when you have to decide between competing options. In that moment, your brain will almost always choose the path of least resistance, which is rarely the path that serves your long-term goals. But when you've already decided what to do through an implementation intention, there's no choice to make. There's only execution. The key to crafting effective if-then scripts lies in identifying the right cues and linking them to the right actions. The cue must be specific, observable, and consistently present in your environment. Vague cues like when I feel motivated or when I have time don't work because they're too subjective and unpredictable. Effective cues are concrete. When I sit down at my desk, when I finish my morning coffee, when my calendar alert goes off at 2 p.m. The action must be equally specific and binary, something you can either do or not do with no ambiguity about what constitutes completion. Work on the project is too vague. Open the project file and write the first paragraph is specific. Be more productive is meaningless. Turn off phone notifications and work for 25 minutes is actionable. The most powerful implementation intentions target the moments when you're most likely to go off track. These are your personal vulnerability points, the situations where your best intentions typically crumble. Maybe it's when you're interrupted during deep work, when you're feeling overwhelmed by competing priorities, or when you're tempted to check social media instead of focusing on important tasks. For each vulnerability point, you create a specific script that defines exactly how you'll respond. If someone interrupts me during my morning work block, then I will politely ask them to schedule time later and immediately return to my current task. If I feel overwhelmed by my to-do list, then I will write down the 3 most important items and focus only on those. If I feel the urge to check social media, then I will take 3 deep breaths and refocus on my current work. These scripts work because they eliminate the cognitive load of figuring out what to do in challenging moments. Instead of having to generate a response on the fly, when your mental resources are already strained, you simply execute the predetermined plan. The decision has already been made, you're just following instructions. The embedding process is where most people fail with implementation intentions. It's not enough to write down your if-then scripts and hope you'll remember them when needed. You need to actively rehearse them until they become automatic responses. This means saying them out loud, visualizing the scenarios, and mentally practicing the execution. Mental rehearsal is particularly powerful because it creates neural pathways that make the actual behavior feel familiar when the situation arises. When you repeatedly imagine yourself executing the script, your brain begins to treat it as a real memory, making the response feel natural rather than forced. The rehearsal should be vivid and specific. Don't just think about the script. See yourself in the situation, feel the emotions you might experience, and visualize yourself executing the predetermined action. The more realistic the mental rehearsal, the more likely you are to follow through when the real situation occurs. Calendar alerts can serve as powerful reinforcement tools for your implementation intentions. Set reminders that display the exact text of your if-then scripts at strategic times throughout the day. This serves both as a prompt to execute the behavior and as a refresher that keeps the script active in your memory. The timing of these alerts is crucial. They should appear just before the situations where you're most likely to need the script. If you tend to get distracted after lunch, set an alert for 12:45 p.m. that reminds you of your focus script. If you typically lose momentum in the late afternoon, set a 3 p.m. reminder about your energy management protocol. One of the most overlooked benefits of implementation intentions is how they free up cognitive bandwidth for creative and strategic thinking. When your routine responses are automated, your conscious mind is available for higher-level work. You're not constantly making micro-decisions about how to handle common situations. You're executing predetermined scripts while your attention remains focused on what matters most. This cognitive liberation compounds over time. As more of your behaviors become automatic, you develop what researchers call effortless self-control. You're not constantly fighting against impulses or forcing yourself to do the right thing. You're simply following well-rehearsed patterns that feel natural and require minimal mental energy. The most effective implementation intentions often target emotional states rather than just external situations. If I feel frustrated with a difficult task, then I will take a 5-minute break and return with a fresh perspective. If I feel the urge to procrastinate, then I will identify the smallest possible next step and do it immediately. If I feel overwhelmed by competing priorities, then I will stop and clarify which task will have the biggest impact. These emotion-based scripts are particularly powerful because they intercept negative patterns before they can spiral out of control. Instead of letting frustration build into anger or procrastination build into avoidance, you have predetermined responses that redirect your energy in productive directions. The key is to identify your personal emotional triggers, the feelings that typically lead to unproductive behaviors, and create specific scripts for managing them. This requires honest self-reflection about your patterns and vulnerabilities, but the payoff is enormous. When you can automatically respond to challenging emotions with productive actions, you become remarkably resilient to the ups and downs of daily life. Implementation intentions also work exceptionally well for building new habits because they eliminate the ambiguity that often derails behavior change. Instead of a vague commitment to exercise more, you create a specific script. If I finish my morning coffee, then I will immediately put on my workout clothes and go to the gym. The habit becomes linked to a concrete cue that occurs consistently every day. The beauty of this approach is that it works with your brain's natural tendency to create automatic patterns rather than fighting against it. You're not trying to maintain conscious control over every behavior. You're strategically programming the behaviors you want to become automatic. But implementation intentions aren't just about individual actions. They can also govern how you respond to complex situations that require multiple steps. If I receive a project request, then I will immediately ask 3 clarifying questions. What's the deadline? What's the success criteria? And who are the key stakeholders? This type of script ensures that you consistently gather the information you need to succeed, even when you're busy or distracted. The most common mistake people make with implementation intentions is trying to create too many scripts at once. Your brain can only reliably maintain a limited number of automatic responses before they start interfering with each other. Start with 3 scripts that target your biggest vulnerability points. Practice them until they become automatic, then gradually add more. Another common mistake is making the scripts too complex. If your predetermined action requires multiple steps or complex decision-making, it defeats the purpose of automation. Each script should specify a single, simple action that can be executed immediately without further deliberation. The scripts also need to be refreshed periodically as your circumstances change. What worked in one context might not work in another, and new challenges will require new responses. Schedule a monthly review of your implementation intentions to ensure they're still relevant and effective. When you master the art of if-then scripting, you develop something that looks like superhuman self-control, but is actually just superior system design. You're not more disciplined than other people. You're just better at eliminating the need for discipline in the first place. Your next challenge doesn't have to derail your progress. Your next temptation doesn't have to overcome your willpower. You now have the tools to program your responses in advance and execute them automatically when needed. But even the most perfectly scripted responses can fail if they're not supported by the right environment and context. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to transform your daily routines into an unstoppable force that carries your most important behaviors forward without conscious effort or decision-making. Chapter 6, Habit Wiring. You've programmed your if-then scripts, and they're working beautifully when you remember to use them. But there's still something missing. Despite all your preparation and automation, you find yourself falling back into old patterns when life gets chaotic. The scripts work when you're conscious and deliberate, but they fail when you're operating on autopilot. And here's the uncomfortable truth. You're operating on autopilot far more than you realize. Neuroscientists estimate that 40% of your daily actions aren't conscious decisions at all. They're habits running in the background of your awareness. These automatic behaviors control everything from how you respond to stress, to how you spend your free time, to how you approach challenging tasks. They're the invisible operating system that governs your life. What if you could hack this operating system and make productive action your brain's default setting? This chapter will teach you to identify the hidden loops that drive your current behaviors and systematically replace them with patterns that serve your goals. you'll discover how to graft new behaviors onto existing routines so seamlessly that they feel like they've always been part of your life. Most people think habits are about repetition. Do something enough times and it becomes automatic. But that's only part of the story. The real secret lies in understanding the neurological loop that drives all habit formation: cue, routine, reward. Every habit, whether productive or destructive, follows this same three-step pattern. The cue is the trigger that initiates the behavior. It might be a time of day, a location, an emotional state, or the completion of another action. The routine is the behavior itself, the action you take in response to the cue. The reward is the neurochemical payoff your brain receives, which reinforces the loop and makes it more likely to repeat. Here's what's fascinating. Your brain doesn't distinguish between good and bad habits. It simply strengthens whatever patterns get repeated, regardless of whether they serve your long-term interests. This is why you can effortlessly remember to check your phone every few minutes, but struggle to remember to review your goals daily. The phone checking habit has a stronger cue routine reward loop. But this same mechanism that creates destructive patterns can be harnessed to create productive ones. The key is learning to diagnose your existing loops and strategically modify them rather than trying to build entirely new habits from scratch. Most habit change advice fails because it ignores the existing neural infrastructure. It tells you to just start doing X every day without considering what cues will trigger the behavior or what rewards will sustain it. It's like trying to build a new highway without connecting it to the existing road network. Technically possible, but unnecessarily difficult and prone to failure. The more effective approach is habit stacking, grafting new behaviors onto existing habits that are already running reliably. Instead of creating entirely new neural pathways, you're extending existing ones. Instead of fighting against your brain's natural patterns, you're working with them. Duke University researchers discovered just how powerful this approach can be when they studied adults trying to establish new health behaviors. Participants who used habit stacking showed 50% better adherence over 6 weeks compared to those who tried to build standalone habits. The stacked behaviors didn't just survive, they thrived, often expanding beyond their original scope as the neural pathways strengthened. The process begins with identifying your anchor habits, the behaviors you already do consistently without thinking. These might include brushing your teeth, making coffee, checking email, or sitting down at your desk. The key is that they happen automatically, at predictable times, with minimal conscious effort. These anchor habits serve as the foundation for your new behaviors. Instead of trying to remember to do something new, you link it to something you already do reliably. The existing habit becomes the cue for the new behavior, eliminating the need for external reminders or willpower. But here's where most people go wrong. They try to stack complex behaviors onto their anchor habits. They decide that after making coffee, they'll spend 30 minutes planning their day, reviewing their goals, and organizing their workspace. This violates the fundamental principle of habit formation. Start small and build gradually. The new behavior you stack should be so small that it feels almost trivial. After making coffee, you'll write down one priority for the day. After sitting at your desk, you'll open the document you need to work on. After checking email, you'll review your calendar for the next 2 hours. These micro behaviors create the neural pathway without overwhelming your existing routine. The beauty of starting small is that the behavior often expands naturally once the habit loop is established. The person who commits to writing one priority often finds themselves planning their entire day. The person who commits to opening a document often starts working on it immediately. The micro behavior serves as a gateway to larger actions, but it doesn't require them. This expansion happens because of what neuroscientists call behavioral momentum. Once you're in motion, continuing the motion requires less energy than stopping and starting again. The small stacked behavior creates just enough activation energy to overcome inertia and trigger extended engagement with the task. But the stacking process isn't just about adding new behaviors, it's also about replacing existing ones that don't serve you. This is where understanding the cue routine reward loop becomes crucial. You can't simply eliminate a bad habit. You have to replace the routine while keeping the cue and reward intact. Let's say you have a habit of checking social media every time you feel bored or restless. The cue is the emotional state of boredom. The routine is opening the social media app, and the reward is the dopamine hit from novel information. To change this habit, you need to keep the cue, boredom, and find a different routine that provides a similar reward. The replacement routine might be doing 10 push-ups, reading 1 page of a book, or writing 3 sentences in a journal. The key is finding an alternative behavior that satisfies the same underlying need, in this case, stimulation and engagement, without the negative side effects of endless scrolling. This replacement process requires careful attention to what reward your brain is actually seeking. The obvious reward isn't always the real reward. You might think you check your phone for information, but the real reward could be social connection, validation, or simply a break from demanding mental work. Understanding the true reward helps you design replacement routines that actually satisfy your brain's needs. The timing of habit stacking is also crucial. The new behavior should be linked to the completion of the anchor habit, not the beginning. After I make coffee, I will write down one priority works better than, while I make coffee, I will think about my priorities. The completion provides a clear trigger and ensures that the anchor habit isn't disrupted by the addition. The physical environment plays a significant role in habit formation because location serves as a powerful cue. If you want to stack a planning behavior onto your morning routine, do it in the same location every day. If you want to add a review session to your end-of-workday routine, designate a specific place for this activity. The environmental consistency strengthens the neural pathway and makes the behavior feel more automatic. One of the most overlooked aspects of habit wiring is the reward component. Many people focus intensely on the cue and routine, but ignore what will make their brain want to repeat the behavior. Without a clear reward, even the most perfectly designed habit will eventually fade away. The reward doesn't have to be external. In fact, internal rewards are often more sustainable. The satisfaction of crossing something off a list, the sense of progress from completing a small task, or the feeling of control from following through on a commitment can all serve as powerful reinforcement. The key is to consciously acknowledge these rewards when they occur, which helps your brain recognize and remember the positive feelings associated with the behavior. Tracking your habit stacks can amplify the reward component by making progress visible. This might be as simple as marking an X on a calendar or as sophisticated as using a habit tracking app. The visual representation of consistency creates its own reward loop and makes it easier to maintain momentum during challenging periods. The tracking also serves a diagnostic function, helping you identify when and why your habit stacks break down. If you notice that your morning planning habit only works 3 days out of 5, you can investigate what's different about the days when it fails. Maybe your anchor habit is less reliable than you thought, or maybe the stacked behavior is still too large and needs to be simplified further. One of the most powerful applications of habit stacking is creating cascading loops, chains of behaviors where each action triggers the next. You might stack planning onto coffee, then stack prioritization onto planning, then stack task initiation onto prioritization. When these loops are properly designed, completing one behavior naturally leads to the next, creating sustained periods of productive action with minimal conscious effort. But cascading loops require careful calibration. Each link in the chain must be strong enough to support the next behavior without being so demanding that it breaks the flow. The goal is to create a smooth sequence that feels natural and sustainable, not a rigid checklist that becomes a source of stress. The most common mistake in habit wiring is trying to change too many patterns simultaneously. Your brain can only reliably form one new habit loop at a time without interference. Attempting to stack multiple new behaviors onto different anchor habits creates cognitive overload and increases the likelihood that none of them will stick. Start with one habit stack. Practice it until it becomes automatic, then add the next one. This sequential approach takes longer initially, but results in more reliable long-term behavior change. Each successfully wired habit makes the next one easier to establish because you're building general habit formation skills alongside the specific behaviors. Another common mistake is choosing unstable anchor habits. If your anchor behavior only happens sporadically, your stacked behavior will be equally unreliable. The anchor must be something you do consistently, regardless of your mood, energy level, or external circumstances. Daily anchors work better than weekly ones, and morning anchors often work better than evening ones because willpower and consistency tend to be higher earlier in the day. The reward mismatch is perhaps the most subtle but devastating mistake. If the reward your brain receives from the new behavior doesn't match what it's seeking, the habit will feel forced and eventually fade away. This is why it's crucial to understand not just what you want to achieve, but what your brain finds intrinsically satisfying about the process. When habit wiring is done correctly, the results extend far beyond the specific behaviors you've targeted. You develop what researchers call habit transfer, the ability to form new habits more quickly and reliably because you understand the underlying mechanics. You become someone who can systematically upgrade their automatic behaviors rather than being at the mercy of whatever patterns happen to form accidentally. Your daily routine doesn't have to be a collection of random activities that may or may not serve your goals. Your automatic behaviors don't have to work against your ambitions. You now have the tools to systematically wire productive action into your nervous system so it happens without conscious effort or decision-making. But even the most perfectly wired habits can crumble under pressure if you haven't built in safeguards against your future self's inevitable resistance. In the next chapter, we'll explore a technique that locks you into following through on your commitments before your motivation has a chance to waver. Chapter 7, Pre-Commitment. You've built the perfect system. Your habits are wired, your if-then scripts are programmed, your tiny starts are automatic. Everything works beautifully until it doesn't. Until the day when motivation evaporates, when the project feels overwhelming, when easier options suddenly seem more appealing. In that moment, all your careful preparation crumbles because you're relying on your future self to make the same choices your current self would make. But here's the uncomfortable truth about human nature. Your future self is not your ally. Your future self will be tired when you're energized, discouraged when you're optimistic, and tempted by shortcuts when you're committed to excellence. Your future self will have perfectly rational reasons for abandoning the very goals that feel urgent and important to you right now. What if you could eliminate your future self's ability to quit before the excuses even surface? This chapter will teach you to create binding agreements with yourself that make following through easier than backing out. You'll discover how to leverage loss aversion, social pressure, and sunk cost psychology to lock yourself into bold action when motivation is high, ensuring you'll execute even when motivation is low. The human brain has a fundamental flaw when it comes to long-term planning. It systematically underestimates future obstacles while overestimating future willpower. Psychologists call this the planning fallacy, and it explains why you can feel absolutely certain on Sunday that you'll wake up early all week, only to hit the snooze button repeatedly by Wednesday. This isn't a character defect, it's a predictable cognitive bias that affects everyone. Your brain is wired to make decisions based on your current emotional state, not your future one. When you're feeling motivated and energetic, it's nearly impossible to imagine feeling unmotivated and drained. When you're focused and clear-headed, you can't conceive of being distracted and overwhelmed. This temporal disconnect creates a dangerous gap between intention and execution. You make commitments based on your peak state, but have to execute them in your average state. The result is a cycle of broken promises to yourself that erodes confidence and creates learned helplessness around goal achievement. The solution isn't to build more willpower or generate more motivation. It's to make decisions that are binding regardless of your future emotional state. This is where pre-commitment comes in, a psychological technique that involves voluntarily constraining your future choices when your judgment is clear and your motivation is high. By creating consequences that activate before you can change your mind, you eliminate the option to quit when things get difficult. The power of pre-commitment lies in how it exploits fundamental aspects of human psychology. We're loss-averse creatures, meaning we feel the pain of losing something roughly twice as intensely as we feel the pleasure of gaining something equivalent. We're also social beings who care deeply about our reputation and standing in our community. Pre-commitment harnesses both of these tendencies to create powerful motivation for follow-through. Consider the research conducted by Dan Ariely and Klaus Wertenbrock, who gave students the option to set their own deadlines for course assignments with financial penalties for missing them. Students who chose to bind themselves with penalty-backed deadlines submitted 50% more work and earned significantly higher grades than those who kept their options open. The mere act of creating consequences for failure transformed their behavior. But pre-commitment isn't just about penalties. It's about changing the psychological landscape so that following through becomes the path of least resistance. When you've publicly committed to a goal, backing out requires explaining your failure to others. When you've put money on the line, quitting means accepting a financial loss. When you've scheduled specific actions in advance, changing course requires active decision-making rather than passive drift. The key is designing commitments that activate your brain's loss aversion circuitry before your motivation has a chance to waver. This means the stakes must be meaningful enough to hurt, but not so severe that they create paralyzing anxiety. The sweet spot is what behavioral economists call optimal friction, enough resistance to prevent impulsive quitting, but not so much that it prevents starting. The most effective pre-commitment strategies combine multiple psychological levers. Financial stakes create immediate material consequences. Social accountability creates reputational consequences. Public declarations create identity consequences. When these forces align, backing out becomes psychologically expensive across multiple dimensions. But here's what most people miss. The commitment must be made when your motivation is at its peak, not when you're struggling. The whole point is to bind your future self when your current self has clarity about what needs to be done. If you wait until you're already struggling with follow-through, you've missed the window when pre-commitment is most effective. The design of your commitment contract requires careful consideration of what will actually motivate your future self to act. This isn't about what sounds impressive to others or what you think should motivate you. It's about what will genuinely change your behavior when you're tired, distracted, or discouraged. Financial stakes work best when they're calibrated to your personal pain threshold. For some people, risking $50 is meaningless. For others, it's enough to ensure compliance. The amount should be large enough that losing it would genuinely bother you, but not so large that the fear of loss prevents you from making the commitment in the first place. The timing of financial consequences is also crucial. Immediate penalties work better than delayed ones because your brain discounts future pain. If you miss a deadline, the penalty should activate within hours, not weeks. This immediacy prevents your brain from rationalizing the failure or finding ways to minimize the consequences. Social accountability adds another layer of motivation by involving your reputation and relationships. When you commit publicly to a goal, you're not just risking your own disappointment, you're risking the disappointment of people whose opinions matter to you. This social pressure can be incredibly powerful, but it requires choosing the right accountability partners. The most effective accountability partners are people who have skin in the game, either because they're working towards similar goals or because they have a vested interest in your success. Casual friends who don't really care about your outcomes won't provide sufficient pressure. But colleagues who depend on your performance, mentors who are invested in your growth, or peers who are pursuing similar challenges can create meaningful social consequences for failure. The accountability relationship works best when it's reciprocal. Instead of just asking someone to hold you accountable, create a mutual commitment where you're both working toward goals and checking in on each other's progress. This eliminates the awkwardness of one-sided accountability and creates shared investment in success. Public declarations amplify the social pressure by expanding your accountability beyond a single person to your entire network. When you announce your commitment on social media, in team meetings, or at networking events, you're creating dozens or hundreds of witnesses to your promise. The potential embarrassment of public failure becomes a powerful motivator for follow-through. But public commitments must be specific and time-bound to be effective. Vague declarations like "I'm going to get in better shape" or "I'm going to be more productive" don't create sufficient accountability because there's no clear success criteria. Specific commitments like "I will complete my certification by March 15th" or "I will launch my side project by the end of the quarter" create clear pass-fail conditions that can't be rationalized away. The automation of consequences is perhaps the most powerful aspect of pre-commitment because it removes your future self's ability to negotiate or delay penalties. When you set up automatic systems that execute without your intervention, you eliminate the possibility of talking yourself out of the consequences when the time comes. This might involve scheduling automatic donations to organizations you dislike if you miss deadlines, setting up accountability apps that charge your credit card for failures, or creating calendar events that will embarrass you if you don't follow through. The key is that the consequences activate without requiring any action from your future self. The psychological impact of automated consequences is profound because they shift the default from "I can quit if I want to" "I will face consequences unless I act." This reversal of the default choice leverages your brain's tendency toward inaction and makes following through the easier path. But pre-commitment isn't just about creating negative consequences for failure. It's also about creating positive consequences for success. When you achieve your committed goals, you should celebrate in ways that reinforce the behavior and make you more likely to make similar commitments in the future. This might involve planned rewards, public recognition, or simply the satisfaction of knowing you kept your word to yourself. The celebration component is often overlooked, but it's crucial for building what psychologists call commitment confidence, your belief in your ability to follow through on promises to yourself. Each successful pre-commitment strengthens this confidence and makes future commitments feel more achievable rather than more daunting. The most common mistake people make with pre-commitment is setting stakes that are too low to matter. They risk amounts they can easily afford to lose or make commitments to people whose opinions don't significantly impact them. The result is a commitment that feels meaningful when they make it, but proves ineffective when they need it most. The stakes should be calibrated to create what behavioral economists call optimal discomfort, enough pain to motivate action, but not so much pain that it creates paralysis. This calibration is highly personal and depends on your financial situation, social context, and psychological makeup. What motivates one person might be meaningless to another. Another common mistake is choosing accountability partners who are too supportive or understanding. While it's natural to want encouragement from friends and family, effective accountability requires people who will actually hold you to your commitments rather than making excuses for your failures. The best accountability partners are those who care about your success but aren't emotionally invested in protecting your feelings. The timing of pre-commitment is also critical. The commitment must be made when you have maximum clarity about your goals and maximum motivation to achieve them. This is typically at the beginning of a project, after a period of reflection, or following a significant success that has boosted your confidence. Making commitments when you're already struggling or discouraged rarely leads to effective follow-through. Pre-commitment contracts should also include escape clauses for genuinely unforeseeable circumstances. While the goal is to eliminate easy exits, you don't want to create situations where legitimate emergencies or changed circumstances force you to choose between your commitment and your well-being. The escape clauses should be narrow and specific to prevent abuse while providing necessary flexibility. When pre-commitment is designed and executed correctly, it transforms your relationship with goal achievement. Instead of relying on fluctuating motivation and willpower, you create external structures that make success more likely than failure. Instead of hoping your future self will make good choices, you eliminate bad choices from the menu entirely. The compound effects of successful pre-commitment extend far beyond individual goals. Each time you follow through on a binding commitment, you build evidence that you're someone who keeps their word. This identity shift creates a positive feedback loop where making and keeping commitments becomes part of your self-concept rather than an external imposition. Your next goal doesn't have to depend on your future self's cooperation. Your next deadline doesn't have to rely on sustained motivation. You now have the tools to lock yourself into success before resistance has a chance to surface. But even the most ironclad commitments can be undermined if you're constantly depleting your mental energy on trivial decisions throughout the day. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to protect your cognitive resources by eliminating the countless micro-choices that drain your capacity for the decisions that actually matter. Chapter 8, Decision Guard. You've locked yourself into your commitments and eliminated the escape routes that lead to failure. Your systems are bulletproof, your habits are wired, your scripts are programmed. Yet by 3 p.m., you find yourself staring at your computer screen with the mental clarity of someone who's been awake for 36 hours. Your brain feels like it's running through molasses, and the simplest tasks require enormous effort. The problem isn't your systems. The problem is that you've been bleeding mental energy all day through 1,000 tiny cuts you never noticed. Every time you decide what to wear, where to sit, which email to answer first, or how to phrase a response, you're making a withdrawal from your cognitive bank account. Each micro-decision seems trivial in isolation, but they accumulate throughout the day like compound interest in reverse, leaving you mentally bankrupt when you need your sharpest thinking for the work that actually matters. What if you could eliminate 90% of these energy-draining choices without sacrificing any meaningful options? This chapter will teach you to identify the hidden decision points that are silently sabotaging your mental performance and systematically eliminate them through default rules and environmental design. You'll discover how to craft a daily experience where the easiest action is almost always the right action, preserving your cognitive resources for the decisions that can actually change your life. Most people dramatically underestimate how many decisions they make in a typical day. From the moment you wake up, your brain is constantly choosing: hit snooze or get up, shower first or check phone, coffee or tea, which route to work, where to park, which elevator to take. By the time you sit down at your desk, you've already made dozens of choices, and your mental fuel tank is noticeably lower. This isn't speculation, it's measurable physiology. Roy Baumeister's groundbreaking research revealed that decision-making literally depletes glucose in your brain. When participants were forced to make a series of choices about trivial matters, they performed significantly worse on subsequent tasks requiring willpower and persistence. The ego-depleted participants quit challenging puzzles 60% sooner than those who hadn't been forced to make decisions. The implications are staggering. Every time you deliberate about something that doesn't matter, you're stealing energy from something that does. Every moment spent choosing between equivalent options is a moment of mental horsepower that won't be available for strategic thinking, creative problem solving, or pushing through resistance on important work. But here's what's particularly insidious about decision fatigue. You don't feel it happening. Unlike physical fatigue, which announces itself through obvious symptoms, mental depletion creeps up gradually. You don't notice your judgment degrading or your willpower weakening until you're already making poor choices or avoiding difficult tasks entirely. This is why successful people often appear to have superhuman discipline. It's not that they have more willpower, it's that they've systematically eliminated the trivial decisions that drain willpower from everyone else. They've learned to guard their cognitive resources like a miser guards gold, spending mental energy only on choices that can create meaningful impact. The solution lies in understanding the difference between decisions and choices. A decision is a deliberate evaluation of options that requires conscious thought. A choice is simply the execution of a predetermined rule or pattern. The goal isn't to eliminate all choices from your life, it's to convert as many decisions as possible into automatic choices. This conversion happens through what behavioral economists call default rules, predetermined responses to recurring situations that eliminate the need for conscious deliberation. Instead of deciding what to wear each morning, you establish a default wardrobe. Instead of choosing where to sit in meetings, you default to the same spot. Instead of deliberating about when to schedule calls, you default to specific time blocks. The power of defaults lies in how they interact with your brain's natural tendency toward cognitive efficiency. When faced with a choice, your brain will always prefer the path that requires less mental effort. By making the right choice the default choice, you align your natural laziness with your long-term goals. But creating effective defaults requires careful analysis of your current decision patterns. Most people are completely unconscious of how many trivial choices they make throughout the day. The first step is becoming aware of these hidden decision points by tracking them for a few days. Notice every moment when you pause to consider options, no matter how briefly. The tracking process itself is often eye-opening. You'll discover that you're making dozens of micro-decisions about things that have no meaningful impact on your outcomes. Which pen to use, which browser tab to open first, which side of the elevator to stand on, which parking spot to choose when multiple equivalent options are available. Each of these moments represents an opportunity for automation. The question isn't whether the choice matters, it's whether the decision process matters. If the outcome is essentially the same regardless of which option you choose, then the decision process is pure waste. The most impactful defaults typically involve recurring situations that happen multiple times per day. Your morning routine offers rich opportunities for automation because it sets the tone for your entire day. Instead of deciding when to wake up based on how you feel, establish a consistent wake time. Instead of choosing what to do first, create a standard sequence of activities. Instead of deliberating about priorities, review a predetermined list. Work routines offer even more opportunities for decision elimination. Instead of choosing which tasks to tackle based on your mood, establish time blocks for different types of work. Instead of deciding how to respond to common email types, create template responses. Instead of choosing where to work based on availability, reserve the same workspace for focused work. The key is to start with high-frequency, low-impact decisions and gradually work your way up to more complex patterns. You want to build confidence in the default setting process before applying it to choices that feel more significant. Environmental design plays a crucial role in making defaults stick. Your physical environment should be arranged so that the default choice is also the easiest choice. If your default is to start work immediately upon arriving at the office, your workspace should be set up the night before with everything you need readily available. If your default is to review your priorities first thing in the morning, your priority list should be visible and accessible. This principle extends beyond physical arrangements to digital environments as well. Your computer should boot up to the applications you need for your most important work. Your browser should open to tabs that support your goals rather than distract from them. Your phone should be configured to minimize interruptions during focused work periods. The goal is to create what behavioral economists call an anti-acrasia system, an environment where acting on your long-term interests requires less effort than acting on short-term impulses. When the right choice is also the easy choice, you don't need willpower to make good decisions. Decision batching is another powerful technique for reducing cognitive load. Instead of making similar decisions throughout the day, you group them into dedicated time blocks and handle them all at once. This might involve reviewing and responding to all non-urgent emails twice per day rather than checking constantly, or scheduling all your meetings for specific days of the week rather than scattering them randomly. The batching approach works because it eliminates the mental overhead of constantly switching between decision-making mode and execution mode. When you're in decision mode, you can efficiently process multiple similar choices. When you're in execution mode, you can focus entirely on implementation without being interrupted by the need to evaluate options. The weekly commitment calendar is a particularly effective batching tool. Instead of making scheduling decisions throughout the week, you dedicate one session to reviewing your priorities and blocking time for your most important activities. This single session eliminates dozens of micro decisions about how to spend your time and ensures that your calendar reflects your actual priorities rather than whoever happened to request your attention most recently. But decision elimination isn't just about efficiency. It's about preserving your capacity for the choices that actually matter. When you're not exhausted from trivial decisions, you have more mental energy available for strategic thinking, creative problem solving, and navigating complex interpersonal situations. Your afternoon meetings become more productive because your brain isn't running on fumes. Your evening planning sessions become more insightful because you haven't depleted your analytical capacity on meaningless choices. The compound effects of decision guarding extend far beyond just feeling less tired. When you consistently preserve your cognitive resources for high-impact activities, you begin to operate at a higher level across all domains. Your thinking becomes clearer, your judgment becomes more reliable, and your ability to persist through challenges increases dramatically. The most common mistake people make when implementing decision guards is over-optimizing trivial areas while ignoring major decision drains. They'll spend enormous effort perfecting their morning routine while continuing to make dozens of unnecessary choices about work priorities throughout the day. The goal isn't to optimize everything, it's to eliminate the decisions that consume energy without creating value. Another common mistake is creating defaults that are too rigid and don't account for changing circumstances. While consistency is important, your default rules need enough flexibility to handle exceptions without breaking down entirely. This might involve creating if-then rules for common variations or scheduling regular reviews to update your defaults as your situation evolves. The timing of decision elimination is also crucial. The best time to create defaults is when your mental energy is high and your judgment is clear, not when you're already feeling overwhelmed by choices. This typically means doing the setup work during dedicated planning sessions rather than trying to create rules on the fly when you're already depleted. Some people worry that eliminating decisions will make their lives boring or rob them of spontaneity, but the opposite is usually true. When you're not exhausted from trivial choices, you have more energy available for meaningful spontaneity and creative exploration. You're trading meaningless variety in low-impact areas for enhanced capacity in high-impact areas. The decision guard process should be iterative rather than comprehensive. Start by identifying the 5 most frequent, lowest-impact decisions you make each day and create defaults for those. Once those defaults become automatic, identify the next 5 and repeat the process. This gradual approach prevents overwhelm and allows you to refine your system based on what actually works in practice. Tracking the impact of your decision, guards can provide powerful motivation to continue the process. Notice how your afternoon energy levels change when you eliminate morning decision fatigue. Pay attention to how your thinking clarity improves when you're not constantly deliberating about trivial matters. Measure how your performance on important tasks changes when you preserve your cognitive resources for work that matters. When decision guarding is implemented effectively, It creates a virtuous cycle where better choices lead to better outcomes, which lead to more confidence in your default rules, which lead to even better choices. You develop what might be called cognitive sovereignty, the ability to direct your mental energy toward your highest priorities rather than having it dissipated by random demands and trivial choices. Your next project doesn't have to be hampered by mental fatigue from meaningless decisions. Your next important choice doesn't have to be made with a depleted brain. You now have the tools to systematically eliminate the decision drains that are silently sabotaging your cognitive performance. But even the most carefully guarded cognitive resources can atrophy if they're not systematically challenged and strengthened. In the final chapter, we'll explore how to deliberately expand your capacity for sustained effort and turn discipline itself into a skill that grows stronger with practice. Chapter 9, Discipline Muscle. You've eliminated the decision drains, automated your best behaviors, and created systems that work even when motivation fails. But there's one final piece of the puzzle that separates those who sustain excellence from those who burn out after initial success. It's the difference between having a perfectly tuned engine and having the fuel capacity to run it at peak performance for years. Most people treat willpower like a finite resource that gets depleted and needs to be conserved. They ration their self-control, avoid challenging situations, and hope their limited reserves will last long enough to achieve their goals. But what if willpower isn't a battery that drains? What if it's a muscle that grows stronger with training? This chapter will reveal how to systematically expand your capacity for sustained effort through deliberate practice. You'll discover why discipline isn't a character trait you're born with, but a skill you can develop, and learn to build willpower reserves that compound over time rather than deplete with use. The breakthrough came when researchers Mark Muravan and Roy Baumeister decided to test whether self-control could be strengthened like physical strength. They had participants perform daily willpower exercises, simple tasks like using their non-dominant hand for routine activities or maintaining perfect posture throughout the day. After just 1 month, these participants showed a 20% improvement in global self-regulation across completely unrelated areas of their lives. The implications were staggering. People who had been training their discipline through posture exercises became better at sticking to exercise routines. Those who had been practicing with their non-dominant hand showed improved emotional regulation and better performance on cognitive tasks. The willpower they built in one domain transferred to every other area where self-control mattered. This discovery shattered the prevailing wisdom about willpower depletion and revealed something profound. Discipline operates exactly like a muscle. It gets stronger when stressed appropriately, weaker when neglected, and more efficient when trained consistently. The people who seem to have unlimited self-control aren't genetically gifted. They've simply been training their discipline muscle while everyone else has been trying to conserve it. But here's what makes this even more powerful. The training doesn't require massive lifestyle changes or heroic efforts. Just like you can build significant physical strength with short, focused workouts, you can build substantial willpower capacity with brief, targeted exercises that take minutes per day. The key is understanding the progressive overload principle. In strength training, you gradually increase weight, reps, or intensity to force your muscles to adapt and grow stronger. In discipline training, you gradually increase the difficulty of self-control challenges to force your willpower to expand and become more resilient. This might start with something as simple as maintaining perfect posture for 10 minutes each day. Your brain will resist this artificial constraint, generating discomfort and urges to slouch. But by consistently overriding these impulses, you're strengthening the neural pathways responsible for self-regulation. You're teaching your prefrontal cortex to maintain control even when other parts of your brain are pushing for the easier option. The beauty of this approach is that the specific exercise doesn't matter. What matters is the pattern of resistance and override. Whether you're practicing perfect posture, using your non-dominant hand, taking cold showers, or doing mental math instead of using a calculator, you're building the same fundamental capacity, the ability to choose the harder path when it serves your long-term interests. As your discipline muscle strengthens, something remarkable happens. Tasks that once required enormous willpower begin to feel effortless. Behaviors that used to drain your mental energy become automatic. The neural pathways associated with self-control thicken and become more efficient, allowing you to maintain discipline with less conscious effort. This is why people who have been training their discipline for years seem to operate on a different level. They're not constantly fighting against their impulses. They've rewired their brains so that disciplined behavior feels natural. They've moved from white-knuckling their way through challenges to flowing through them with practiced ease. The compound effects extend far beyond personal productivity. When you master tasks that others dread, you become the person everyone turns to when something difficult needs to be done. You develop a reputation as a closer, someone who can be counted on to push through when others give up. This reputation opens doors, creates opportunities, and accelerates your career in ways that technical skills alone never could. Your relationships transform as well. Emotional regulation becomes easier when your discipline muscle is strong, allowing you to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively during conflicts. You become more reliable because you can follow through on commitments even when you don't feel like it. People learn to trust you because they know you'll do what you say you'll do, regardless of changing circumstances or fluctuating motivation. The capacity for sustained effort also unlocks possibilities that were previously unthinkable. You can launch side ventures without experiencing energy crashes because you have the willpower reserves to maintain excellence in multiple areas simultaneously. You can pursue multi-year goals with unwavering consistency because your discipline muscle doesn't fatigue the way it used to. But perhaps most importantly, you develop what psychologists call self-efficacy, unshakable confidence in your ability to execute whatever you set your mind to. This confidence isn't based on wishful thinking or positive affirmations. It's based on a track record of consistently choosing the harder path and succeeding. You know you can handle whatever challenges arise because you've systematically trained your capacity to handle difficulty. The training protocol itself is surprisingly simple. Choose one small daily exercise that requires you to override a natural impulse or maintain an artificial constraint. The exercise should be challenging enough to create resistance, but not so difficult that it becomes overwhelming or unsustainable. The key is consistency rather than intensity. A small daily challenge that you maintain for months will build more discipline than sporadic heroic efforts that burn you out. Your brain adapts to consistent patterns, not dramatic gestures. Start with something that takes less than 5 minutes and can be done regardless of your schedule or location. This might be maintaining perfect posture during your morning routine, writing with your non-dominant hand for 10 minutes, or doing mental calculations instead of using your phone's calculator. The specific exercise matters less than your ability to maintain it consistently. Track your progress in a simple log that records both the exercise and your subjective sense of difficulty. Over time, you'll notice that exercises that once felt challenging become routine. This is your signal to increase the difficulty by about 10%, adding more time, increasing complexity, or introducing additional constraints. The progression should be gradual and sustainable. If you're practicing posture, you might start with 10 minutes and add 1 minute each week. If you're using your non-dominant hand, you might begin with writing your name and gradually work up to longer passages. The goal is steady improvement over time, not dramatic breakthroughs that can't be maintained. Recovery is just as important as the training itself. Schedule weekly deload periods where you reduce the intensity or take a complete break from your discipline exercises. This prevents burnout and allows your neural adaptations to consolidate. Just like physical muscles need rest to grow stronger, your willpower muscle needs recovery to expand its capacity. The tracking component serves multiple functions beyond just monitoring progress. It creates accountability, provides motivation during difficult periods, and helps you identify patterns in your performance. You might notice that your discipline is stronger in the morning, weaker when you're stressed, or more reliable when you've had adequate sleep. These insights allow you to optimize your training and apply your discipline more strategically. But the real transformation happens when you begin to see discipline as a skill rather than a character trait. Instead of thinking, "I'm not a disciplined person," you start thinking, "I'm developing my discipline." Instead of avoiding challenging situations, you seek them out as training opportunities. Instead of feeling defeated when you struggle with self-control, you recognize it as evidence that you're pushing your limits and growing stronger. This shift in perspective is profound because it moves you from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset around self-control. You stop seeing willpower as something you either have or don't have, and start seeing it as something you can systematically develop. Every moment of resistance becomes a rep in your discipline workout. Every time you choose the harder path, you're making a deposit in your willpower bank account. The compound effects accelerate over time because each increase in discipline capacity makes the next level more achievable. As your baseline self-control improves, you can take on bigger challenges, pursue more ambitious goals, and maintain higher standards across all areas of your life. The person who struggles to maintain a simple daily habit eventually becomes the person who can juggle multiple complex projects while maintaining excellence in each. But perhaps the most profound benefit is the sense of agency and control you develop over your own life. When you know you can rely on your discipline to carry you through difficult periods, you stop being at the mercy of your moods, circumstances, or external motivation. You become the author of your own experience rather than a passive victim of whatever happens to you. The final challenge is to commit publicly to a 30-day discipline sprint where you track and share your progress. Choose one willpower exercise, announce your commitment to people whose opinions matter to you, and document your journey. This public accountability will amplify your motivation and create social pressure to follow through. Record not just whether you completed each day's exercise, but how it felt, what you learned, and how your capacity is changing. Pay attention to spillover effects, improvements in other areas of your life that seem unrelated to your specific exercise. Notice how your confidence grows as you prove to yourself that you can maintain discipline even when it's difficult. At the end of the 30 days, you'll have more than just a stronger discipline muscle. You'll have concrete evidence that you can change yourself through deliberate practice. You'll have experienced firsthand how small, consistent efforts compound into significant transformations. You'll have built the foundation for a lifetime of continued growth and achievement. This is the ultimate payoff of first principles discipline. Not just the ability to overcome procrastination, but the capacity to systematically upgrade every aspect of your performance through the application of rigorous thinking and sustained effort. You're no longer someone who hopes things will work out. You're someone who makes things work out through the systematic application of proven principles. The 8 chapters you've just completed aren't just productivity techniques. They're a complete operating system for human achievement. First principles thinking eliminates overwhelm. Constraint mapping focuses your energy. Inversion planning prevents failure. Tiny starts overcome resistance. If-then scripts automate execution. Habit wiring makes excellence effortless. Pre-commitment locks in success. Decision guards preserve your cognitive resources, and discipline training expands your capacity for sustained effort. Together, these principles form an integrated system that transforms not just what you accomplish, but who you become in the process. You're no longer at the mercy of motivation, circumstances, or luck. You have a reliable methodology for turning any vision into reality through the systematic application of first principles discipline. The question isn't whether these principles work. The research is overwhelming and the logic is unassailable. The question is whether you'll apply them consistently enough to experience their compound effects. Whether you'll trust the process when motivation fails, Whether you'll maintain your systems when life gets chaotic. Whether you'll continue training your discipline muscle even when the benefits aren't immediately obvious. The choice is yours. But now you have something most people never get, a proven roadmap for destroying procrastination forever and building the life you've always known you were capable of living. The only thing left is to begin.